You know what I enjoy sometimes? A big old trip to Nostalgia Town. Hey, bring me to Good Memory City. Aw man, haven't been to Reminisce Village in a while. But seriously, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I like a good story that reminds me of my childhood. But I don't necessarily want it to feel like I'm watching it on a tiny square VHS TV screen. In other words, give it to me with a good modern twist, a nice sheen of that new. And you know where I found that? In Hell's Paradise. It really does feel like it was written as a love letter to series I used to watch or read in my early days, such as Inuyasha, Rurouni Kenshin, Samurai D. Perkyo, and even Naruto. It has the right atmosphere, the right convictions, but it's polished with today's methods, and I think it makes for a delightful experience. Add to that a killer cast and oof, we're off. So, let's delve deeper into Hell's Paradise and figure out if it really is a heavenly read or a hellish ride. Hey! I did it! I did the pun thing! Before we get started though, I'd like to welcome you to MangAnalysis, where I do little reviews of the manga I've been reading. If you like what you see and would like to see more, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. Maybe even leave a comment. Let's get that conversation going. Hell's Paradise, written and drawn by Yuji Kaku, takes place in feudal Japan. The shogunate seeks the ever-so-coveted elixir of immortality, and having learned of its whereabouts, a super dangerous island on the coast of Japan and China, sends a ragtag team of warriors to fetch it for him. What composes his team, you ask? 8 of the worst, most deadly death row convicts in all of Japan, as well as 8 samurai/executioners, each tasked with chaperoning a convict. The convict who manages to make it back with the elixir will be granted a full pardon and his freedom. Among these criminals is Gabimaru, the ultimate killing machine shinobi from the ninja village of Iwagakure, considered by many to be the home of the finest assassins. Partnered with Sagiri, a rookie yet still expert swordswoman executioner, Gabimaru must face off against the other criminals, their partner executioners, and worse than all that, the island itself. Who will be the first to reach the elixir, and what strange force dwells deep inside this wretched island? The first thing that I love about Hell's Paradise is the simplicity and nostalgia that it can evoke. It's something I feel I've seen before, that I grew up with even, yet remains something much more than just a cheap copy. The feudal setting definitely lends itself to that nostalgia, but it's more than just that. I see it in the characters, the way the fights are orchestrated, and even in the dialogue. All those aspects remind me of my childhood, but there are other aspects that remind me of more recent reads, such as its darker themes, battle royale influences, and its approach to more complex ethical issues. The story is simple, but really well written. It doesn't pretend to have some grand, complicated, finely weaved narrative, but it also doesn't shy away from tapping into all sorts of interesting topics such as politics, history, ethical and moral dilemmas, such as slavery and classism, even gender issues, and it delves into these pretty convincingly. The story's simplicity is actually an asset in this case, for it leaves ample space for the other aspects to shine, such as its characters and atmosphere, which are so important for a story like this. Hell's Paradise doesn't try to break the mold or do anything fancy or super complicated, but rather delivers a simple package, elegant and done very well. I'll take that over a complicated mess anytime. It was a very comforting read that brought me back to my early days of reading manga, reading of samurai and shinobi slaying one another as means of survival, or simply to gain the title of the very best. The next thing I loved about the series was its characters. Even the characters I didn't like were at least interesting. Well, the main characters at least. More on that later. The main cast, for the most part, is divided into 2 categories, the convicts and their executioner samurai. It's neat because despite all the criminals having the same goal, which is to find the elixir and get out of there alive, they all have vastly different reasons for doing so. Some definitely have more interesting backgrounds or developments, but I found myself intrigued by almost every single one. Each of them are presented at first as these super criminals with hardened histories and legendary exploits under their belts, and getting to know more about them was honestly one of my biggest interests in the series. The other half of the cast, the executioner samurais, are just as interesting. They all have the same goal and actually mostly come from a similar background, yet they're all very different. Each of them have their very own interests and methods of dealing with their convict, as well as their own ways of getting over the many obstacles they face on the island. Some continue to treat their convicts as nothing more than lowly criminals, while others develop bonds with them. They each have their own perspective on the way of the sword and what it means to have the responsibility of being an executioner. Seeing this ramshackle band of misfits and samurai battle their way to freedom was entertaining to no end. So if you've seen my videos, you know that I tend to only mention one thing I dislike about a series. But for this one, I actually have two. But don't panic, it's not because the series is any less good than any of the others. It's just two little things that I felt I should mention. The first thing I disliked are the villains. Remember when I said that the main characters were interesting, but then I added, more on that later? Well, this is what I meant. The villains are very simple. Now, I know I praised this series for its simplicity, but I did say that it had complex characters to make up for it. I wish the villains could have been treated the same. They're all very similar and hard to differentiate in their designs and motives. They don't really have what I would call a convincing raison d'être. Now, without spoiling anything, there is a narrative reason for that, I guess, but I still think they could have been handled a little bit more interestingly, if even only via their dialogue and reactions to the other characters. The other thing isn't really a negative thing in itself, it's actually a pretty common trope in this type of series. It's the trope of power creeping. I don't love it. Power creeping is essentially when a story keeps introducing a stronger bad guy, or stronger weapons, or techniques, or better whatever, rendering the previous events essentially obsolete. Even the series that I mentioned loving from my childhood, such as Inuyasha, Samurai Deeper Kyo, Rurouni Kenshin, and Naruto, especially Naruto, all use power creeping. A lot. And I get it, it's an easy way to demonstrate growth, but I also think it's an easy, lazy way to develop a character. Hell's Paradise, however, isn't a terribly long series with only 13 books, so its effects aren't too bad, but it's still there. Regardless, if you're a fan of this type of series, then I'm sure power creeping is something you're well acquainted with, so it might not even be an issue for you. So with all that said, should you check out Hell's Paradise? It depends. Do you like badass displays of martial arts and super awesome fight scenes? And do you like such fight scenes to be carried out by a stellar cast of characters, each using diverse and varied types of martial arts? If so, then this is definitely a series I can recommend. Also, bonus if you're a little older and grew up reading other series like this. It'll twist your nostalgia buttons real good, and other than making you feel old, irrelevant, and lost to the endless thread of time, that's always a good thing, right? Well, that was Hell's Paradise. I hope you enjoyed this little review, and if you did indeed enjoy it, consider subscribing. This was MangAnalysis, and I'll see you in the next one.